Hey friends, I'm Greg Nettle, and I serve as president of Stadia Church Planting, where we want to help you start thriving, growing, and multiplying churches for the next generation. Welcome to the Church Planting Podcast. I have a dear friend on the show today, Tammy Melchien. Tammy is a writer and teaching pastor who is passionate about helping people take the next steps with Jesus. She has served on the staff at Community Christian Church in the Chicagoland area for over 20 years, and most recently as the leader of the teaching team. That'll be the subject of another podcast. She holds a master's degree from Lincoln Christian Seminary and will be publishing her first book, Choosing the Opposite, which is set to release in October of 2025. I'm excited to talk to Tammy about choosing the opposite on this episode of the Church Planting Podcast. Well, I'm really excited about this episode of the Church Planting Podcast because I have a longtime friend on this episode. Welcome to the Church Planting Podcast, Tammy Melchien.
Thank you so much for having me, Greg. Yeah, we've had some adventures together, so it's kind of fun to do this.
I mean, we met in Israel.
We did.
I remember we were out on the Sea of Galilee together.
Yes, we were. We got to go on a pastor's trip for 2 weeks there, and boy, what an experience of a lifetime that was.
And that kind of cemented our friendship. And then I found out that you're a Cleveland Cavaliers fan, and we were just kind of lamenting our playoff run here before we got started.
Yeah, but we're believing strong for next year.
Yeah, always. That's what we do in Cleveland.
Hey,
Tammy, you're over in Chicagoland, and with our dear friends, Ferguson Brothers, and just amazing work that's going on over there. I want to start because you have campus church planting background.
Absolutely. Yeah. I've actually been here at Community. Can you believe it? 23 years now.
Wow. So I remember on the trip I was trying to hire you. Yeah. I was trying.
But yeah, I've been here 23 years, so I've had a number of different roles. One of them being church planner. Back in 2010, I moved, we are a multi-site church, and I moved into the city of Chicago from the suburbs to launch a location there as the campus pastor. So I know a lot of the challenges and the struggles, but also the joy and the fruit that so many of your listeners have experienced or are experiencing right now. But for the last decade, I have been leading the collaborative teaching team here. So
how many teachers are on that team?
Well, we probably have kind of a core of writers that I would say are about 8 of us. Most of them are campus pastors or lead pastors.
Yeah.
And then, there's probably another 10 people that contribute throughout the year to that team in writing. And then we probably have about, among all of our locations, I would say between 20 or 25 people that actually deliver messages, because we do them. We write collaboratively a shared message, and then 7 different teachers are giving that message then.
Okay. I feel like we need to do another episode in the future, Tammy, and just talk about that. I love the idea of collaborative.
Yeah, we could do that. Yeah, we could do that.
I think that would be a really fascinating thing for all of our listeners to hear about, because it's a pretty unique gig what you guys have going on there, and obviously very, very effective. Hey, when you planted, you moved from the suburbs, moved downtown. What was the most difficult? This is kind of off the cuff. Like, can you think back and go, and this was really challenging as a planter?
Yeah, I think honestly, I was the first woman to do it, and everyone from our location, and, people would ask me, was that difficult? But honestly, in the city environment, I feel like that actually worked to my advantage.
Why?
Because I think there were a lot of people in the city of Chicago, especially, that felt like, they carried a lot of baggage about some of the ways churches have treated women.
Okay.
And so I think a lot of them felt like, okay, finally a church that is allowing women to use their gifts and to lead. And so there were a number of people that came to the location and told me that was a big factor into it.
Wow. Fantastic.
But yeah, probably the most challenging thing for me was, I'm single. I've always been single. And, I realized how much church planting wives do for the guys.
It's true, right? It's a free staff member in most cases.
Yeah, it is. And so, it was pretty exhausting. All of the, both the leadership of the church, but all of the relationships in the church, kind of all of that was on me. And so that was probably the hardest thing for me, combined with the fact that in a urban city environment, the turnover of people, there's such a transient. I started before I was at community, I was in campus ministry, and I kind of felt like I was in the adult version of that.
Okay.
Where people were there for a couple years, you'd build them up as a leader, and then they'd have a job change, or they'd have kids and move out to the suburbs. So it was challenging.
So what was the biggest joy of planting in that urban context?
Obviously, just seeing, the congregation was so much younger than a lot of the suburban ones, and seeing the light go on for people. And, seeing the young professionals that, we had multiple stories of I'm successful in my career, I'm doing all this, and I thought I would feel satisfied, but I'm not, and there's got to be something more. And actually, it was like a young executive in a recruiting company was our very first baptism, and that was his testimony. That, and so just seeing the connections that were made in that way, and and I mean, the reason that we all go into church planting is to see people come to Christ, and so
right.
That was definitely.
I love it, Tammy, and I'm proud of you. Okay, so you sent me an advanced copy of your new book that is coming out when?
It comes out October 7th. It's actually my first book.
Okay, and I read the advanced copy. It's fantastic, and I said, hey, we need to get Tammy on our podcast for a whole variety of reasons. The title is Choosing the Opposite. What led you to write this?
Well, honestly, it first emerged out of my angst. And my guess is a lot of people leading church can relate to this. When we were in the throes of COVID, I think, it was hard for all of us. It was a struggle for all of us. And I know I've talked to lots of pastors that part of what was so hard during that season is maybe it exposed our discipleship as not as strong as we thought it was. And when I think about it, a moment like that, a crisis moment like that is affecting everyone, when so many people are afraid and so much chaos is going on, should have been a moment for the church to shine. It should have been an opportunity for us to be that city on the hill, to be that light and that salt. And it kind of felt to me like we just decided instead to argue.
Wow. What are we arguing about?
Well, everything, politically, culturally, masks, vaccine, all of this stuff.
Oh, it was crazy, wasn't it?
It was crazy. And it honestly, it was quite discouraging to me for a while. Okay. Because you step back and you go, okay, what am I doing? This is what, this is what we're, but as I leaned in, Choosing the Opposite is based on the Sermon on the Mount. But as I continue just to lean into the teachings of Jesus, my angst actually turned to hope, because part of me realized, Jesus came to show us a better way. And his teachings are directing us to that better way. And the problem isn't that we're following that way and it's not working. The problem is we're not really following that way.
So choosing the opposite. What's the central thesis?
Well, it's. Are you a Seinfeld fan?
Absolutely. Isn't everyone?
So then, well, and you've read the advanced copy. The title emerged from an episode of Seinfeld, where I think it's called The Opposite, where George Costanza doesn't like the way his life is working out.
Yep.
And he's looking and he said, nothing I want is happening. Everything is going the wrong way. And so he decides that he's going to choose the opposite of his every natural instinct. And so if you remember the episode, it's, he orders the opposite lunch he would normally get. And there's a woman in the cafe that ordered the same lunch, and she ends up becoming his girlfriend. And, all of these things that he does the opposite of his natural instincts. And all of these, everything starts turning around in his life. And again, I don't know if Jesus is a Seinfeld fan, but the point I'm making in the beginning of the book is I think he might be calling us to our George Costanza moment.
So we'll call this the gospel according to Costanza.
There you go. All right. That we look out at so much in our world and we don't like the way it's going. And maybe it's the bigger landscape of our culture, but also I think, for a lot of us, it's very personal. Some of relationships that are broken, and, some of those kind of challenges.
Finances.
Absolutely. All of this stuff that is not the way we want it to be. But what I'm challenging, hopefully gently and humbly challenging us to in the book.
Sometimes it's gentle, other times not.
Other times not, which is probably good.
Yeah.
To just consider maybe whether some of the choices we're making have led to the situations that we're finding ourselves in.
Okay, so you talk about thinking upside down. Explore that a little bit with me.
Well, I think, by default, it's really hard not just to think along with all the groupthink going on around us. It's hard not to get sucked into all of that and to just think the way the world thinks without even realizing it, the way the culture thinks, and even the way that sometimes, we in the church group are thinking together.
Absolutely.
And so when I look at the Sermon on the Mount, what I see in the Beatitudes is not a checklist of things that Jesus is telling us to do. I don't think he's saying, hunger and thirst for righteousness, become a peacemaker. I mean, of course, those things are good, but I don't think that's what he's doing. And what I think he's doing in the Beatitudes is he's trying to reframe the way that we look at the world. Because we all, again, most of us would say, oh yeah, no, we don't value our highest values aren't power and wealth. But when it comes down to it, I think we still want power. We would still much rather be rich than poor. We would still, all of these things. And Jesus is like flipping all of that upside down in the Beatitudes and he's saying, I want you to start looking at everything differently. And the reason that they're blessed is because Jesus is sitting right in front of them saying, I'm going to lead you into a better way. I'm going to show you a better way. And I think he's doing that for us today too.
You talk about loving radically in the book. Mm-hmm. And I think that term was one of the most appealing chapters and topics for me personally. Unpack that. Maybe even give us an example of living in the city. How have you loved radically or seen it happen, play out?
Yeah. Probably be easier for me to answer how I've not loved radically. But, even thinking about the context of, that chapter is based on the section of you have heard that it was said, but I tell you. And I think Jesus is giving us examples of what it looks like to love radically. And when I think about that in the context of church planning and church planning podcasts and ministry leaders, one of the ways that I think we have to live that out is the turn the other cheek. I was talking with a friend in ministry the other day, and Greg, you've been in this game long enough, as I have, that so many times people are going to speak ill of you. They're going to twist conversations you had or decisions and obviously they're coming out of their own hurt, but it's also really challenging sometimes to not want to lash back, not want to correct the record, not want to, and a lot of times, you're the one with the microphone, so you could do that. But I think one of the things in ministry that, that is so hard, but that we're called to, and that I feel like, if you're asking me how have I tried to live this out, it's in those times to not lash out, to not retaliate, to turn the other cheek and just kind of trust your reputation to God. And I think that is again, that is not probably a natural instinct, but I think it is a way we are called to love radically, to extend a radical kind of grace in those situations.
I think it's, I think back to King Saul and David, and when Saul throws the spear at David. And, I've always said, if I would have been David, I would have picked that spear up and I would have whipped it right back. Yeah. And he didn't do that. He just, he left, right? Yeah. And in some ways, that's a radical love. But radical love's risky.
Oh, it is. Yeah, absolutely.
And so you're out there, you're church planting, you're loving people, you're wanting to multiply. How do you see that love radically play out? I mean, how do you suggest we love radically? We turn the other cheek. What else?
again, if you're following along with that scripture, that passage of scripture, I mean, it's about like the oath parts. I think it is about radically telling the truth. Of not trying. And I don't mean that in terms of like lying as much as I mean, like being willing to say the hard thing, or being willing to say the thing even when you know it doesn't make you look good. Yeah. To being willing to be honest and authentic and vulnerable in those things. I think that's a way we love radically. I'm
just pondering here, Tammy, because to love radically and enter into that vulnerability is a really challenging thing to do as a leader, especially.
Yes. Yeah. And honestly, I don't think we can do it unless we have been loved radically. And that's what I think, like, so many times our failures to be able to love is because, maybe we haven't allowed God to love us to the place where we are kind of secure in that, and secure in the love that we have from him. And maybe those, few people in our center circle that we are totally transparent with, totally ourselves with, and recognizing that, okay, when we are loved well we are loved well by God, and when we allow, a few important people in our life to love us well, we can be free to then maybe not need to, to be grasping for that love from everybody.
Okay, I've known you for a long time. Quite frankly, because you talk about leaning into relational maturity in your book, and you've been relationally mature ever since I've known you. So, and I'm not blowing smoke. You just have. But so, what aspects of growing in relational maturity are you asking us to lean into?
Well, probably a big one right now, which, when you write a book, you're usually writing it to yourself. I found that with this one.
Good word.
Is that, like for me right now, and I'm guessing for a lot of, like maybe for you, for a lot of people, it is so hard right now not to fall into the trap of playing the role of judge. And by that, I don't mean like discerning what is wise and unwise. I mean the judge of like deciding who to throw in the good bucket and who to throw in the bad bucket. And I mean, I feel like we're even encouraged right now to do that. And, and it can actually honestly feel good to do that.
Yep.
But the truth is, it's like I think it's doing damage to our souls. It's doing damage to our relationships. It's doing damage to our communities. And it's not leading us to a world that looks more like the kingdom of God, which is ultimately what Jesus is trying to teach us to do. And so, for me, I'm having to find myself catching that tendency to want to throw people in the good or the bad bucket, and not letting myself off the hook for that, and not letting myself like have the authority for that.
Give us an example. What makes your decision to throw somebody in a good or bad bucket?
I mean, it can be a number of things. It can be different political views, different, religious views. It can be, like for me as a woman in ministry, it's easy to go, oh, you don't think that I should be a pastor.
Yep.
Let me throw you in the bad bucket.
Yep.
And it can be easy to do that and feel completely justified in doing it.
Let's land there for just a minute, because I always tell people in my own story, I mean, I grew up in a church, went to a seminary, all of this stuff for years, led River Tree, where I didn't think the Bible allowed women to be pastors, and then went through a 7-year study of scripture with our elders where we came out being gift-based, not gender-based, and empowering people to the full extent of their theological understanding. And so I think there is this idea now that I have to remember that it's all good. As long as people have studied through it, as long as they're on their Jesus journey, it's not my job to judge. It's my job to help them on their journey, right? Mm-hmm. But it's even in the political realm. I think about, the fact that Julie and I moved into the city of Cleveland so we would be, around diversity, because we were just stupid about diversity for years and years.
Yeah.
Not because we wanted to be, but because we lived in an all-white community for 25 years.
Yeah. And when you stay in your bubble, nothing's challenged. I mean, I felt the same way living in the city of Chicago was a big growth point for me in that as well.
But the point is it makes you, if we kind of remember where we've come from, And I'm not even sure it's all lands that we're going to land in the best spot, but at least, you can be more patient, not throw people in those buckets, but really embrace them on whatever part of the journey they're on.
Yeah. And I like to talk to about it as like honoring each other's relationship with God.
Oh, that's good.
That like God doesn't need me to be the one to judge you. Like he doesn't, and so like I can honor your, I can honor that you're on a journey with God in the same way that I want you to honor that I am. And
yeah, I read a quote in some book, but it said, when we do that, it's like somebody opened the book of my life and they read one paragraph and they're going to judge me on that one paragraph rather than reading the whole book. Right.
Yeah. Yeah.
And who knows where we're at. Okay. I want to, you had some great insights in your book about listening to Jesus, hearing Jesus, obeying Jesus. Talk about, how do you hear from Jesus in your own personal life, Tammy?
In my life?
Yeah.
Well, I feel like for me, the two keys to this, because I do believe, Jesus said the Spirit is going to be another advocate. I'm sending you another helper. Yeah. So I see the Holy Spirit's role in my life as what like Jesus was physically in the lives of his disciples. And so of course, like if I'm going to live my days with him, he's going to speak to me. He's going to talk to me. But just like in any relationship, I feel like for me, the key is margin and intentionality.
Okay, margin and intentionality. And we're working from the premise that I don't want us to lose, that Jesus is going to speak to us. And I think that's biblical, straight out of the Gospel of John for sure.
Yes. Yeah. And so, what I have found in my own life is that, and again, this is the same as any relationship. If you don't create the margin for connection and you don't have the intentionality, you will miss things. Like you won't, you can be in the same house, you can be in the same place, but you won't pick it all, like you won't hear.
Every Sunday afternoon, my wife and I sit down intentionally to go over our calendar for the coming week, then the coming month. Because if we don't do that, we won't communicate it.
Yeah. And so for me, it's if I want to hear from God, it's about, okay, how do I create the margin in my life for that? And I've had, quite honestly, I've made some, kind of decisions that were like strange to some people over the past few years because I wanted that margin. Like I stepped down from the lead team of our church because I felt like, okay, my greatest contribution here right now is the teaching team. And I didn't feel like I had the margin to be hearing from God, to be leading that in the right way. And so, I don't, maybe there are other people that have more capacity than me that could do it all. But I just felt like for me, if I need to have the margin and these spaces where I can linger with God, not just touch base with him, where I can linger with him. And then it's also about intentionality. Like, it's interesting. It's like, I can be in my car on the way to a meeting and I can let my mind wander on a million things. I can put on a podcast. And then I can enter into that meeting and things are fine. But I can also be in my car on the way to the meeting and just ask God, okay, I'm meeting with this person. Is there anything that you want to say?
Yeah,
is there anything you like? And so it's so much of the time, it's just about intentionality, that if I am intentional about it, I will hear from him. But if I'm, just kind of like letting myself wade out in the, and again, I do not do this perfectly, but I find that when I'm intentional, I hear. When I'm not, I don't. And there's probably a correlation there.
All right. I didn't tell you we were going to talk about this because this has just come up in my mind. So, the Apostle Paul is very clear. It's better to be single if you can be single, right? Mm-hmm. You have more time for Jesus, more intentionality, more margin, all of those things. I think you're setting the example. I think you're setting the pace. What would you say to our church multipliers out there, people thinking about planting a church and they're single?
It's hard sometimes.
Church planning's hard.
Yeah, church planning is just hard. But I also, I felt like, especially when I was younger and I felt like, sometimes it was more of a struggle. I just decided that I was going to take advantage of exactly what you're saying, I was going to take advantage of the opportunity that God had given me. And so, just leaning into, sometimes there is more and I'm also wired this way for contemplative stuff, but there is more margin for you to spend time with Jesus. There are opportunities to, like, I also kind of decided I wasn't going to not do something just because I didn't have a spouse to do it with me. I would do it with Jesus.
I like it.
And just, I have some wild stories, I feel like, of how, he showed up for me and those kind of things that could be for another day. But yeah, because, whether you're single or married, though, I feel like the thing we have to understand as church planners, as ministry leaders, is that the greatest thing that we can give to those we lead is a heart that is intimately connected to God. No matter how many plans or strategies or how brilliant you are on a platform, it's not like, nothing is going to compare to you ministering out of your own intimacy with God, because then they're not just getting you, they're getting the Spirit working through you. And I feel like we all, like, intuitively sometimes can tell this. Like, we can tell when someone is operating out of an anointment. and like, I think for all of us, that's what we should desire. But that doesn't come from our own striving and our own play. That comes from our commitment to living a life of intimacy with Jesus. And quite honestly, it might be a little easier for me because I don't have, someone else pulling on my direction. I especially feel sometimes for people when they're in that, like, toddler preschooler stage of life, because that's just a little crazy. But yeah, like, that's the greatest thing we can give. And so, how do we protect that? How do we create margin for that? How are we intentional about that?
All right, friends, Tammy Melchien, author of Choosing the Opposite, releasing in October of 2025. Pick it up. It's an amazing read. Tammy, thanks.
It's available for pre-order now. So
pre-order now.
Order it now.
Where can we go? Amazon, wherever?
Everywhere. Amazon, Barnes & Noble.
Everywhere books are sold.
Everywhere books are sold. So thanks so much,
Thanks for being on the podcast, Tammy.
Thanks for listening to the Church Planting Podcast. The Church Planting Podcast is part of the Stadia Podcast Network. To find more great episodes and to see how Stadia can help you start thriving, growing, multiplying churches for the next generation, be sure to check out stadia.org/podcasts.